So I'm preparing to fiberglass the bottom and the sides up to the water line, or actually a little above the water line. But so I lay the cloth out. I'm going to do half at a time, and so I will do the first layer of epoxy on this side first, and then I will do the other side, and I'll overlap on the keel a few inches, and just to make it a little thicker on the keel, and that way I don't have to worry about trimming or making these edges line up exactly in the center. And so when you lay this cloth down, you got to be careful. You can't really pull and tug on it. You have to be really careful about that. So getting it smoothed out like this and getting it ready takes some finagling, and you just have to be careful with it. So you can see, obviously there's a lot of overlap here that I don't need. So you can roughly see that tape under there. That edge is where I will be trimming it. So once I put the first layer of epoxy on, I'll wait for it to start curing a little bit. And then once it does, then I'll run a knife gently, carefully along there and trim along the edge of that tape. And that'll be where it'll go up to the side, up in the sides. So, and trimming these notches out is kind of a pain. It's hard to trim this cloth. It frays and things, so it takes a little finagling with that too. And so you can see it's not super clean. It doesn't have to be perfect because there'll be epoxy on here, but I wanted the fiberglass to be up close to the edge for these notches and then the prop shaft hole. So that's what it looks like so far. So what I plan on doing on this back corner is folding this over like a present, like this, and I plan on doing it on the side here. And then once this is all fiberglassed in, I'll be able to smooth that down, and the seam will pretty much disappear. On the back, I'm just gonna go down to above, that water line, or a little above the water line actually, but wherever I have it marked, that's where it'll go, and on the back. And then when I overlap this other piece here, it'll overlap, and then these seams will sand right out. You won't see them. So I just finished wetting out the 6-ounce fiberglass cloth on the port side and up to a little above the water line. And one thing I did do before I put the cloth on is I did rough sand, or lightly sanded with 80 grit, the encapsulated surface, just to help with a little bit of a mechanical adhesion. And then laid the cloth on there, and I did cut out notches for that. I think I talked about that. Notches for the fin, prop shaft holes, strut, and rudder. So, and here in the back corner, I kind of did a fold like a present on the side, and then that should sand down and disappear nicely. And that's going to be painted anyway. So even if there's a slight line there, you'll never see it, since that's actually below the water line. So here's what it's looking like so far. And what I did after I got it on, I had to work pretty fast. Using a slow cure epoxy is a must, in my opinion, when you're doing this by yourself. And so you can keep that wet edge going. And so my next step is to wait for it to partially cure. And so then what I'll do is I'll take my sharp utility knife along that edge and hopefully be able to trim the edge of that fiberglass. So I'm waiting for that. So that'll be next. Oh, and something else I did is after I got it done, then after a while I just kind of kept an eye on it, and I would lightly roll little bubbles that seemed to try to be popping up or something. Maybe the cloth wasn't laying down just right, or I got it pretty good when I wetted it out, but I just kind of kept an eye on it and helped it to settle out. And you can see where I went over and kind of overlapped, so roughly 3-ish to 4-ish inches. And then when I do the starboard side, I do the same thing and overlap it on that side. And then when that I'll sand that down and you won't see those edges. One thing I forgot to mention is what I used to actually spread the epoxy is I mixed it in a container, and then I would pour a third or a half of that. I did 21 ounces at a time, and it took me 42 ounces to wet this out of mixed epoxy. And so I used a 4-inch foam roller, and I didn't pour it on the boat. I tried that at first, and it just wasn't working so good. So I just wetted the roller in that tray, and then spread it. And it takes a while, but you will get it done. You just have to be careful because it'll make the cloth move as you're doing it. So, and another thing that you want to do is as you're going along, and then even afterwards, like when I was kind of watching for little high spots or little bubbles or something, I was also making sure this edge was smoothed out. So, because the edge can be tricky as you're going along, it'll kind of want to bunch up. So you got to get the bubble out there. So I would, more than once, I went from the bottom down the side and just kind of kept working that so that cloth was stuck real good to that edge. And again, that edge, you want to have a radius roughly like a pencil, because that helps with the cloth through here. You can't have a sharp edge, or the epoxy or the cloth, you won't be able to get it to lay down for you. So the epoxy turned green, and so I was able to take my utility knife and run right along that edge of the blue. The blue tape is actually the edge that I want. Just carefully ran that along there, and there's the pile of cloth that I trimmed off. And so it actually worked pretty well. And I was wondering, I went ahead and peeled the tape off back here because I wondered how hard it was going to be to get off, because it's been a couple coats of CPES since I've had this taped, and also one coat of encapsulating epoxy that's been dried, and then this coat of epoxy which is wet. But I was just curious if it was going to be tricky to peel that off. So it seems like it's going to come off pretty good. There'll be a little bit of tape I'll have to peel off. So I'm going to leave the rest of this on until I'm done fiberglassing, which means multiple coats of epoxy on this cloth.